Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Unitarian Society of Germantown's live stream worship service. My name is Javier Ramos, and I am today's worship associate. We have the pleasure of having Jerry Whalen as our speaker this morning. If you don't know, I'm the president of his fan club. Our music is brought to us by Mark Dougherty and Bob Heffley. Our technical help this morning is given by Avery Hamill, Jessica Stanforth, Lisa Dutton, Carolyn Scott, and Celeste Lamb. Before we begin our service, we have a few announcements. Visitors and return guests, we are glad to see you, as well as regular members and friends. Please see emails and links in the chat section of Zoom, in your newsletters, and on the church's website. If you or someone you know is experiencing hardships, please reach out to us. Contact any staff member or our caring team. Remember to look in the chat for the links for these upcoming programs and events. For kids, we have coloring pages that'll be posted in the chat. In addition, at 12 p.m., Growing Anti-Racist UUs for K through second graders meets at 1 p.m. We have the Anti-Racist for third through sixth graders. And at 3 p.m., the youth edition of Minecraft UUtopia meets. And for adults, we have some things for you, don't worry. At 11:45 a.m., USG's Humanist Group meets, and at 5, a mindfulness breathe session is offered. Folks new to USG, mark your calendars because next week you get a chance to have a Q&A session with our Reverend Kent at 11:15. It's going to be a chance for you to get to know USG and our minister a little better. Speaking about Kent, he actually has a special shout out.
Thank you, Javier, and good morning and blessings to all. I also am so grateful that Jerry is in the pulpit this morning, sharing an important message from his heart as Jerry is also leading. He'll mention our new chapter in our lives of Braver Angels, a program that's really important for our congregation and nation right now. And I one little thing I want to say for next week, I am preaching on a TV show which involves wilderness survival. It's called Alone. It's on the History Channel. If you want to check it out, you could watch. I'm going to be mostly focused on the first season. It's people living as long as they can with just 10 items in the wilderness. And I'm trying to draw lessons on how we can survive to thrive in our lives in this such difficult times of pandemic. So check it out, people. I want to give a shout out to everyone who made our Dr. King Day of Service so successful. Lois Murphy was a tremendous leader as an architect and organizer of so many of us, and then so many people helped. A few short months ago, we really didn't know how we would do it, as we are so committed to being safe in the pandemic. But we mobilized over 200 volunteers, many including you. We gave healthy, good food to folks who are struggling with food insecurity. We made meaningful, heartfelt connections with folks who are struggling or maybe feeling isolated. We upped our skills in advocacy, and we engaged in advocacy and public witness and more. Thank you all for helping us continue to make that day not a day off, but a day on for living out the mission and legacy of Dr. King's life. A big part of the mission of our church. At this time, let us turn our attention to the here and now.
Come into this circle of love and justice. Come into this community where we can dream and believe in those dreams. Come into this holy space where we remember who we are and how we want to live. Come now and let us worship together. We now light the chalice, a symbol of our faith and community, with the following words from the Passover Haggadah. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom.
Two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, a time to weep. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to build up, a time to break down, a time to dance, a time to mourn, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time for every purpose under heaven. A time of love, a time of hate, a time of war, a time of peace, a time you may embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to gain, a time to lose, a time to rend, a time to sow, a time for love, a time for hate, a time for peace. I swear it's not too late. Through everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time for every purpose under heaven.
Good morning. I chose this story today because I got to make a lot of fun animal noises. And also because the story shows how listening is not passive. It's not something we do between the things we're planning to say. True listening is active. Listening requires patience and compassion and the willingness to stick through awkward moments. It requires the ability to withhold our expectations and to be truly present in the moment to what shows up now. So I had a dream last night, I should say early this morning. And in this dream, I was walking with a dear friend and he told me, I'm not sure what I'm going to say next. Will you just listen with me? And I did. That dream I had last night reminds me that we often don't even know how we feel ourselves until we make words of our thoughts and our feelings. And until we have someone who can give us that gift of listening, of true active listening. That's the way that it is with us humans. So how can we make room for active listening in our lives? Perhaps we can catch a moment later today or this week when we think we know what someone's about to say, and then we have this moment of clarity to truly listen with full knowledge that this moment is unique in all of history and that we're forging it together. Blessed be.
We'll now take some time to celebrate the joys that we have in our community. Congratulations to Joe Bernstein and Tegan Hagee, welcoming Micah Zinn Fitzgerald Bernstein on Saturday, January 2nd. He joins his big sister Azalea, who's almost 5. Our thoughts and prayers are with Myra Silver, age 72, aunt of Howard Silver, who has contracted COVID-19. She attends many of our Sunday services, as well as participates in our mindfulness activities. Our thoughts and prayers are with Maggie Chapman and her housemate, Dagmar Hollis, who are recovering at home from COVID-19. Our thoughts and prayers are with intern minister Latifah Griffin's family, who is on the mend. Let us now take a moment of prayer and meditation with the following words by Bishop Michael Curry before singing Spirit of Life. Love your neighbor, that's why we are here. Love the neighbor you like, and love the neighbor you don't like. Love the neighbor you agree with, and love the neighbor you don't agree with. Love your Democrat neighbor, love your Republican neighbor, love your independent neighbor, love your Black neighbor, your white neighbor, love your Asian neighbor, your Latino neighbor, and your Indigenous neighbor. Love your South American neighbor, love your LGBTQ neighbor, love your Jewish neighbor, love your Muslim neighbor. Love, 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 love your neighbor as yourself.
Good morning. First, I'd like to thank our beloved pastor and my dear friend, Reverend Kent Mathias, for inviting me to speak this morning. It's an honor, a privilege, and it's a little bit scary. So let me go on. On March 4th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated for his second term as President of the United States. He had defeated his Democratic opponent, General George McClellan, a Democrat with 55% of the popular vote, just over 2 million votes. He was facing a deeply divided nation, not only in the split in the electorate of the Union, but in the many more millions still vowing allegiance to the Confederate States of America. The nation had been embroiled for 4 years in a bloody civil war that pitted brother against brother and divided families, with casualties on both sides that even by today's standards were staggering. The war would not end until April 9th, 1865, when Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox. But Lincoln was not seeking revenge against those who had threatened the Union and brought this bloody war upon the nation. He knew that revenge and punishment could never lead to the healing that would be so necessary and so difficult in the years to come. So he concluded his second inaugural address, which is inscribed in the walls of the memorial where we now honor him, with the simple words, "With malice toward none, with charity toward all." Going on to say, "With firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations." Whether Lincoln could ever have led the nation to that just and lasting peace, we will never know. He was killed by an assassin's bullet only a month later on April 15th, 1865. It's been said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. The dark clouds hanging over our America today are too painfully familiar. So where to begin? How about where we are? And where we are, I would submit, is in a very angry place. Our anger is righteous and for good cause, not only over the events of January 6th, but for the preceding 4 years when we saw all norms of decency torn down to be replaced with a far-ranging set of policies based on cruelty, most often toward the weakest and most marginalized of our brothers and sisters. Anger demands accountability. That accountability now takes the form of impeachment of Donald Trump for a second time. Whether that impeachment leads to a conviction and a bar from ever serving again, only time and the US Senate will tell. And it is certainly appropriate to urge our senators to move to such an outcome. But Donald Trump was held accountable in an even more meaningful manner when the American people in a free and fair election rose up to soundly defeat him in his bid for a second term. He lost in a landslide. Case closed. Would that it were so. In reality, even though Joe Biden had a clear electoral college victory and amassed an over 5 million vote plurality in the popular vote, almost 75 million Americans voted for Donald Trump. And shockingly, a high percentage of them refused and still refuse to accept the results of that election. The calls for unity that we heard in Biden's inaugural address were music to our ears and represented a complete reversal of Trump's efforts. And yet, we have a divided nation. And a divided nation cannot move forward, cannot heal. So what can we do? What can we do with our anger? I suggest we need to begin with compassion. And perhaps surprisingly, first with compassion for ourselves. We have been through a lot and we have been badly wounded. We need to acknowledge that and recognize that. And no Pollyanna response will be authentic to ourselves or even to each other. So I'm not going to say just love your neighbor. Not just yet. Even though we celebrate, and rightly so, turning a major corner with the election of a new administration, which finally presents the calls to action and unity that we have been waiting for so long, the vitriol will not stop. Over the next few weeks, we will hear defenders of Donald Trump in the well of the Senate, presenting yet more lies to try to exonerate him from one of the most heinous acts in the history of our country. At some point, there will be a vote. And regardless of the outcome, a very large number of Americans will be unhappy, and we will still be divided. So at some point, perhaps not today, but at some point, we will need to start the cleanup after the hurricane, the tornado, the earthquake. How can we do that? And can compassion help us? It begins with the mindset. We tend to see the others as all of a kind, but they are not. First of all, and most obviously, they are not Donald Trump. There is rather a range of those who supported and voted for Donald Trump who wanted 4 more years of him. There are, of course, the crazies. No point in mincing words. There are some of his base who have gone so far into the dark land of conspiracies that they may never be salvageable. But there are many more who also suffer now. They believed that he would lift them up from their poverty, their lack of dignity, their voicelessness. And he didn't. They were betrayed. Where do they turn now? This is a critical juncture for the future of our nation. Those who track the dark social media report that the forces of white supremacy are actively trying to recruit these disillusioned Trumpists. That could compound and sustain the division in our land for years to come. But what if we were to reach out to them, to say, yes, you made some very bad choices, but you are not demons. You are people just like us. Come back into the house. Help lift this load. But this is delicate work. It cannot be done with condescension, and it cannot be done even with our righteous anger. If it is to succeed, it must be done with compassion. This work is not easy, not for the faint of heart, but it is work that must be done. Remember, Donald Trump took delight in dividing people in whatever way he could. To let that division stand or even worsen, in fact, gives him the final victory. We will not let that happen. A divided country cannot go forward, cannot conquer a pandemic, cannot climb out of the direst economic challenge since the Great Depression, cannot bind up the festering wounds of hundreds of years of abusing our Black and Indigenous peoples. So to be a stark pragmatist, we need those people with whom we have disagreed and even fought against. We cannot have nearly half of America on the bench, sitting out, or worse yet, undermining the most important battles in our history. So there are self-serving reasons, but there are more altruistic reasons too, which, as it turns out, are also good for us. Unbridled anger can be a force that is destructive, not only to the objects of our anger, but to ourselves. It is said that anger does more harm to the vessel in which it is held than on which it is poured. Even worse than anger is contempt. In a book titled Love Your Enemies by Arthur C. Brooks, which Reverend Kent previously preached on, the author proposed that America was suffering from an epidemic of contempt. That was over 2 years ago. That's probably even truer today. Contempt is a complete rejection of another's humanity, with no desire to speak, hear, or see anything they might say, think, or feel. It is a complete demonization of another. And like anger, it takes a toll on those who wield it. Booker T. Washington said, supposedly he learned this from his grandmother, and Martin Luther King Jr. echoed him. Let no man drag me so low as to hate him. Let no man drag me so low as to hate him. So what is this compassion I speak of? Some hear it as weakness, giving up, giving those who have done the bad things a pass. Far from it. Compassion only can be when we relate to others as people, as real people, who we must hold to standards of decency and integrity. We must see that core of humanity in them that we share, and see that as sons and daughters of the divine, they have a birthright to our respect. One of the essential characteristics of compassion is empathy, the ability and the willingness to feel, to try to understand what the other feels, to stand in their shoes. When we are separate from others, we do not communicate with them. If we do not communicate with them, we cannot know them. And if we cannot know them, we will fear them. So it begins with people coming together to communicate, and especially, like Ryan's rabbit earlier this morning, to listen. Not to change minds, not to win arguments, not even to win people over, but just to understand why people think and act the way they do, to learn their stories and paths, to hear and feel their pain, often not unlike ours. This is the work we do in an organization called the Braver Angels, but I'm not here to do a commercial for that group today. The link to their website is in the chat. At some point, I would encourage you to explore it, especially if anything I say today resonates with you. And there'll be more information coming forth in the communicator. But I will share with you that over the last couple of years, and even especially over the last few weeks, I have been with people who voted for Trump. And along with the cadre of people who voted against him, people like you, we've had deep conversations about very hard to talk about issues that divide us. These people are real. They want an end to the division, and they are willing to work at it. I hate that Donald Trump has usurped so many previously noble phrases, so I am taking one back. There are good people on both sides. So besides joining Braver Angels, and I hope you do, how can you practically incorporate the willingness to reach out in your life right now? Take a breath. Disengage. Stop piling on. If we are going to reach out to people, we have to stop beating up on them. When someone, whether in real life or in social media, makes a point about how bad the others are, and you agree, let it be. If the point is made, your adding fuel does nothing but heat things up so that the other side of the issue will never be heard. Stop going to your silo for all your news. Find sources that are balanced and that provide news, not just endless commentary. Look for the good in others. Talk to people, real people, not on Facebook, not online. Maybe people you work with, maybe relatives that you feel you have come to a final impasse with. Realize that if you had their story and lived through what they lived through, you might well think or feel as they do. Remember, this is not a debate. Your facts will never displace their facts. The only thing that ever really moves people is trust. This is not easy work. It calls for not only compassion, but for humility and a willingness to recognize that maybe we don't know it all, that there may be truths and ways of seeing that are beyond the limited lexicon of our tribe. We must be willing to recognize and respect the humanity we all share. Now, lest this all sound very dark or daunting, let me acknowledge that we have cause for great rejoicing in the new administration in Congress that we believe will take us on a very challenging and difficult journey, but one where there is real hope, integrity, and decency. It's a big train, and there is room for all Americans. So let us open the doors and fill the seats and allow all to help lift the burdens. So the title of this talk today was With Malice Toward None. My first subtitle was, Is America Broken? America has been beaten, bruised, and battered, but it is not broken. It has withstood the most vicious onslaught since the Civil War and the most malicious attack on its democracy ever. But it has held. It has received deep wounds, gashes actually, but on both sides of that divide, there are people who are anxious to reach across and begin the very hard work of healing. I know, I've met them, and I urge you to find some of them in your own lives. My second subtitle was, Can Compassion Fix It? In truth, I cannot think what else ever could. Finally, I'm very clear that not all of you will readily receive these words. Many may still be too angry, too outraged, and not ready to see the humanity in those who they feel betrayed us all this time. Many will say, it's too soon. I get that. I do. And let me be clear, I'm not there all day, every day either. Sometimes I feel like this is too much, even for me. But let's all remember where the compassion starts, with ourselves. So if and when you're ready, come, join in the healing. You will be most welcome. This was a very difficult piece to write, and I did not finish it until last night. Partly because I did not know what might happen on Inauguration Day or the days following. And the threat continues, but I do not think we can wait for it all to end. To paraphrase Lincoln, we must begin binding up the nation's wounds. When we look more closely and compassionately at the wounds of our enemies, we may see that their wounds are not unlike ours, and they need not be our enemies. I close with another quote from Lincoln. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory will swell when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. Oh, and do just love your neighbor. Thank you.
From the light of days remembered burns a beacon bright and clear, guiding hands and hearts and spirits into faith set free from fear. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. From the stories of our living rings a song both brave and free, calling pilgrims still to witness to the life of liberty. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. From the dreams of youthful vision comes a new prophetic voice, which demands a deeper justice built by our courageous choice. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin.
Man, I love that song. That's one of my favorite hymns. This church and congregation are places of love, giving, and compassion, where distance does not keep us apart. The offering today goes to USG. To donate via text, send the amount you wish to give, a space, and then pledge to 215-608-2660. You may also give online at usguu.org/give. Instructions are also in the chat and on the screen.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us, only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you will join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you will join us, and the world will be as one.
Our very first Unitarian principle is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. These remarks come from Reverend Dr. Rebecca Ann Parker. Reverence and respect for human nature is at the core of Unitarian Universalist faith. We believe that all the dimensions of our being carry the potential to do good. We celebrate the gifts of being human, our intelligence and capacity for observation and reason, our sense and ability to appreciate beauty, our creativity, our feelings and emotions. We cherish our bodies as well as our souls. We can use our gifts to offer love, to work for justice, to heal injury, to create pleasure for ourselves and others. Just to be is a blessing. Just to live is holy. The great 20th century Rabbi Abraham Heschel wrote. Unitarian Universalists affirm the inherent worth and dignity of each person as a given of faith, an unshakable conviction, calling us to self-respect and respect for others.
Thank you so much, Jerry. We will now extinguish the chalice as we end our worship service. There we go. All are invited to remain for fellowship in a breakout room. Blessings to you this coming week. Now, please pass the virtual peace to your neighbors.